Imagine discovering that one of the worst things that ever happened to you was not caused by ignorance, but by understanding something too well, not learning the wrong thing, learning the right thing, completely. Imagine realizing that the moment your life finally made sense was the moment it became impossible to live inside it. That possibility is almost never discussed because it collides with one of our deepest assumptions: that insight is always liberating, and that the truth, however painful, ultimately saves. Oedipus Rex shatters that assumption. It does not ask what happens when a man makes a terrible mistake. It asks what happens when a man refuses to leave anything unexplained. And there is no position from which the audience can observe it safely. Sophocles Oedipus Rex is usually described as the tragedy of a man who discovers a horrifying truth about himself. That description is comforting. It allows us to place the catastrophe at the end of the story, at the moment of revelation, as if everything before it were merely preparation. But the real disaster begins much earlier. It begins the moment Oedipus commits himself to the belief that nothing must remain unknown. At the start of the play, Thebes is dying. A plague has seized the city, and Oedipus responds in the only way that makes sense to him. He assumes there is a cause. He assumes the cause can be identified, and he assumes that once identified, order will be restored. This is not arrogance. It is competence. It is the same confidence in intelligibility that once saved the city from the Sphinx. A monster posed a riddle. The riddle had an answer. Reason dissolved terror. Oedipus lives in a world where problems yield to inquiry, where darkness is temporary, where mystery is an insult to intelligence. That victory matters more than the prophecy ever does. Because once you have defeated chaos by understanding it, you begin to believe that understanding is always the cure. You begin to believe that every wound has an explanation, and that explanation, once brought into the light, heals. This belief becomes the foundation of Oedipus's identity. He is a man who does not merely rule, but explains. A man who does not tolerate gaps. A man who cannot allow a question to exist unanswered. So when the oracle announces that the plague will end only when the murderer of Laius is found, Oedipus does not hesitate. He does not qualify his promise. He does not leave room for ignorance. He binds himself publicly to the search. He issues curses. He swears that the criminal, whoever he is, will be driven out, cut off, erased. In doing so, he transforms an investigation into a moral absolute. From this moment on, stopping will not mean discretion. It will mean betrayal of the city, of justice, and of himself. This is the point where the tragedy truly begins, though nothing yet looks tragic. Everything looks responsible. Everything looks admirable. Oedipus is doing exactly what we expect a good ruler to do. And more importantly, he is doing exactly what we as an audience want him to do. We want answers. We want causes. We want the story to make sense. Then Tiresias enters. Tiresias is usually treated as a symbolic figure, the blind seer who knows what the seeing king does not. But this turns him into something mystical and safe. In reality, Tiresias is dangerous because he represents an alternative ethic of knowledge. He does not refuse to speak because the truth is hidden. He refuses because the truth is already known, and because it will destroy the one who hears it. This is the first moment where the tragedy could end without catastrophe. The truth exists. It does not need to be articulated. The city could continue. The king could rule. Life could go on, scarred, but intact. But Oedipus cannot accept this. Not because he is proud, but because silence violates his deepest conviction, that a truth which exists but is not spoken is a moral failure. For Oedipus, knowledge withheld is not mercy, it is corruption. So he presses, he interrogates, he accuses. And when Tiresias finally speaks, Oedipus reacts exactly as we do. He dismisses him. He treats the warning as evasion. We side with clarity against obscurity, with reason against riddles. Sophocles has already aligned us with the very impulse that will make the disaster inevitable. As the investigation continues, something subtle but fatal happens. The search for the murderer no longer serves the city. It serves coherence itself. Each testimony generates a contradiction. Each contradiction demands resolution. Each gap in the story becomes intolerable. Oedipus does not ask whether the truth will help. He asks only whether the account is consistent. What began as rational governance turns into epistemic compulsion. This is why Jocasta's role is so important and so often misunderstood. She is not merely afraid of shame. She understands something Oedipus cannot yet see. That identity itself is at stake. She senses that if the inquiry continues, their lives will not simply be damaged. They will be reclassified. Every relationship will invert. Every meaning will collapse into its opposite. She begs him to stop, not because she fears truth, but because she understands that some truths annihilate the frameworks that make life livable. Her pleas fail completely. They cannot succeed. Because for Oedipus, to stop asking questions is to abandon the very principle that defines him. Ignorance is not a refuge. It is a threat. A gap in knowledge is a wound that must be cauterized, no matter the cost. By the time the final messenger arrives, the tragedy is already complete in its essentials. The recognition that follows does not feel sudden because it is not. The audience has been prepared to want it. We crave the final piece. We feel the tension of near completion. And when the truth is finally assembled, father killed, mother married, prophecy fulfilled, the horror lies not in the content, but in its totality. Nothing remains unexplained. There is no residue, no ambiguity, no story left untold. Oedipus's life collapses into a single, perfectly coherent narrative. And that coherence destroys him. This is why the imagery of sight and blindness only fully activates at the end. Earlier, sight meant mastery. To see was to understand. To understand was to rule. But now sight becomes unbearable. To see clearly is to see a world without escape. A world where every action has been accounted for, every intention stripped of innocence, every identity reduced to fact. Oedipus blinds himself not simply as punishment and not merely as symbol. He blinds himself because sight has become lethal. Darkness restores something vision has annihilated. Opacity. A space where not everything is known. A world where some truths no longer assault him continuously. At this depth, the debate about fate begins to look like a distraction. The prophecy does not force Oedipus's hand at every turn. It merely guarantees that a truth exists. What destroys Oedipus is not that the truth exists, but that he cannot allow it to remain unspoken. Even without Apollo, even without oracles, a man structured this way would eventually ruin himself. Because the demand for total intelligibility has no natural stopping point. Oedipus is often described as innocent in intention and guilty in action. This is true, but incomplete. What condemns him is not moral failure, but allegiance to a form of rational life that admits no limits. He is responsible not because he desired evil, but because he desired absolute clarity. He wanted a world with no remainder, no shadows, no unanswered questions. And human life cannot survive that demand. This is where the play turns outward, toward us. Because Sophocles has trained the audience to want exactly what destroys Oedipus. We wanted the answer. We wanted the final explanation. We wanted the story to close cleanly. And Sophocles gives us that closure, then forces us to watch what it costs. The deepest insight of Oedipus Rex is not about gods, or fate, or tragic irony. It is about the danger of believing that self-knowledge is always liberating. That insight is always redemptive. That explanation is always a cure. Sophocles suggests something far colder, that a fully intelligible self may be incompatible with a livable life. Oedipus is destroyed not because the truth is ugly, but because it is complete. Nothing remains outside it. Nothing remains human. And that is why the play has never stopped mattering. It does not warn us against pride. It does not warn us against curiosity. It warns us against the belief that there is no such thing as knowing too much, that every mystery deserves resolution, that every question must be answered. Because the question it leaves us with is not, "What would I have done?" but rather, "At what point would I have stopped?" And the most disturbing possibility is this: you wouldn't have.